There's nothing wrong with basic chords. Some of the greatest songs of all time have been written using only basic chords and simple triads. But as songwriters and composers, we need to keep expanding our repertoire, learning new material, and finding interesting ways of expressing our ideas. Luckily, there are some simple and very effective ways to transform your chords and make them sound amazing. And in this video, I'm going to talk you through some of those ways, show you how to find them on the guitar and move them around the fretboard, and I'm also going to show you how to put them together to create some really beautiful chord sequences for your songwriting. And importantly, none of these shapes require that you know how to play bar chords. So whether you're a beginner or perhaps a more advanced player looking to spice up their chord repertoire, these chords are very, very useful. The first chord I want to look at is the C major. It's one of the first chords we learn on guitar. And it's a really useful form, and we hear it in a lot of different songs. The great thing about this form, however, is that we can do a lot with it simply by moving some of our fingers around. So if we take our first finger off, we introduce the major 7 note. So now we have access to the C major 7 chord. The little finger that's hanging down there, we can now drop that little finger to add a 9 note. And this really is one of the secrets to creating beautiful sounding chords and chord sequences. It's this idea of adding little melodic lines on top of your chords. Now that really is taking a static chord and adding some movement to it. But we can go a step further now and introduce a new chord form. And this chord form I'm going to show you is one that is less commonly used. It's the 6-9 chord. And what we have here is the root note, the 3, the 6, the 9. And if we want, we can also put the 5th on top. And you can hear that 6 and that 9 really kind of adding some interesting colors to the chord. The great thing about this too is this is a movable shape. So we could go, and that in itself, just moving between the C and the D chord, is a great little motion, moving the chord up a tone and then back down again. If we introduce the 5th note that we had, we get that sound. And what I love about this chord is that we've got the finger creating like a little mini bar. It's not a bar chord because it's really just a little flattening of the finger across a few strings there. But what's great about it is that we can actually lift up that little finger and introduce this note, which is the sharp 4 or the sharp 11. So now we get another little melodic idea on top of this chord. Now we can combine that with the original C form and start to get some really great melodic ideas happening. The next chord I want to look at is the G major chord, and it's often played like this. It's a great sounding chord, it's using all 6 strings, and we hear this in a lot of different songs. But the great thing about this chord is we can actually simplify it a lot by taking off all the fingers except for the one playing the root note. And why this is great is because we're actually utilizing the open strings here to create this very open sound. And those 3 strings there actually form a G major triad. Now, why this is useful to have the fingers off is because it allows us to now hammer on and pull off certain notes to again create this kind of movement with these chords. Hear that a lot in country and folk music. What we can now do is bring the little finger into play. And again, it's this idea of adding some melody to the chord or some movement to the chord. But instead of doing it up high, we're going to do it down on the lower strings. So we're going to start by hitting the A note or the 9. And then we're going to bring the 7 into play. And then we're going to drop that 7 down to the 6. You hear John Mayer used this kind of effect in Why Georgia. He creates this little riff with the hammer on it. It really sets up the whole tune. Let's move on to the E major. The E major, again, is one of those chords that we learn first on guitar. It's a great chord. It's using all 6 strings and especially utilizing the bass string, the lowest string we have, which is the E string, unless we're tuning down. And this 9 note, again, is one that we can use to really make this chord sound interesting. And I love using this chord at either the beginning or the end of a song. It just has this beautiful, warm kind of effect, especially if we use a backward rake. Lots of resonance in those open strings. We can take the E major and now turn it into an E minor. And again, use the 9 note. Really beautiful sound, quite dark and mysterious. Let's go to the A minor. And again, we can add that 9. If we play the D minor, that's even easier to add the 9 because we simply have to take our first finger off. And you can hear there how effective that could be as a little melodic idea. Now, again, what we're looking for is any opportunity to use the fingers that we have available. So when we were playing the C major chord, we had the first finger that we could take off to make the major 7, and we had the little finger that we could drop to add the 9. D minor is exactly the same thing. You can hear why these ways of playing chords could be so useful in songwriting because they really feel like little sections on their own almost. You could imagine these being used to create a verse or a chorus simply with the melodic movement that you're using on top of the chord. And so what it's allowing us to do as songwriters is to have chord progressions that aren't particularly complicated. We may only have 2 or 3 chords in a section, but we can create a lot of movement and a lot of motion with those chords that we're using. I've also created a free PDF showing how these forms are laid out on the fretboard and which fingers you use to play them. So if you're interested in that, you'll find the link below. Now, another great chord in open position is the F chord. And traditionally, to play an F major, we have the finger flattened across those 2 strings. But of course, we can leave that open and create the F major 7. We also have the little finger lying there ready to go for that 9, which we've been hearing a lot with the other chords. And once you get comfortable using these other fingers that aren't actually playing the chord, you can get some really lovely sounds, such as this. This F chord can also be played with a split voicing if we take the first finger and come across to the 6th string. And we're going to put our 3rd finger there on the 3rd note. So we're creating like a 10th voicing there. We're doing a little split voicing. And this split voicing is very useful, especially if you're not comfortable playing bar chords, because we can still move this shape up the neck and look for opportunities to engage the open string on top. So that's a really great little chord shape that is movable, and it won't work in every key, but there's a lot of different chords we can play there using that top string. So you can now see that there's a couple of things we can consistently do to turn these basic chords into more interesting chords if we want to. One of those things is, of course, to use the fingers we have available to create some melodic movement on top of the chord. Another way we can start to make these chords sound really interesting is to use a bass note that isn't the root. So far, we've really been playing all of these chords in root position. And when we're constructing chords, we're usually using the 1, the 3, and the 5. That creates the basic triad. If we want to add the 7th, if we want to add the 9th, we can add those on top. But the basic triad construction is 1, 3, 5, or 1 flat 3, 5 for a minor chord. We can now take the 3 or the 5 and create the chord off one of those bass notes. We don't have to play it only off the root. And we'll use D as a great example. So with a D chord, we can do a couple of things just with that shape that we've already done with the other chords. We can take this finger off to create a sus2 kind of sound. We can also add the little finger to create a sus4 kind of sound. And there we have our melodic movement between those three. But what we're now going to do is find a different inversion of this chord, and one that really sounds great is to take this F sharp and to play the D off that chord. So we're essentially going to take this note here and we're going to transfer it over to here, and we're going to adjust our fingers like so. And that's a really lovely, rich sounding chord. It's still a D chord, but now it's called a D over F sharp because we're putting an F sharp in the bass. And where this becomes really useful is if we were to resolve it, say, to that chord there. So here's a little sequence that sounds really nice, incorporating both those kind of vamps, moving to this chord, and finally to the G. And once we know we can play chords off the root, the 3, and the 5, it really opens up a lot of possibilities. For example, even if we just go back to that basic C chord, putting the 5 in the bass creates this really rich sound. And that's a chord that you hear a lot in contemporary music because it just has such a full sound. We can also take the F chord and put the C in the bass, which is the 5 of the F chord. And where that becomes really useful is if we were to go back to the C chord. So the C bass note becomes the common note. The great thing about the guitar is that it has this ability to let open strings ring, and we want to look for those opportunities as often as possible. You can keep moving this shape and adjust the little finger. For example, there we've got a D minor 11. So this form again can keep going up the fretboard, and you can choose to either use open strings or not where it's appropriate. But that C sharp position is gorgeous because of the fact you can do the pull off with the first finger. And if we were to put this in the context of a little chord sequence, what if we went C sharp minor to an A and then back to E? And then on the A, instead of playing the A like this, when we play it as this little mini bar, it gives us the chance to create this pattern. The thing about that little A vamp is we can do another move, which is to take the whole thing up a tone and then back down. And because we have that E major 9 that we could play, we can also put that in at the ends.